Alright, so I finally finished up the Yakuza Remastered Collection with Yakuza 5 Remastered. I don't know if many other people feel this way about 5, but my expectations were honestly exceeded. This game was almost as good as 0, in my opinion. And even then, the main advantages I feel like 0 has are pretty minor in the grand scheme of things, or because it was my introduction to this, really fun, unique series, which is going to inherently give that entry a bit of an edge. But it also 5 also has some, unique things to it that set it apart from 0 and the rest of the series so far. The big one being is that the overall structure of the game is less like one big Yakuza game and more like 4 mini Yakuza games. I haven't played The Man Whose Name Was Erased or whatever that game was called, or Pirate Yakuza yet, but I almost imagine them being, a similar length and scale to the 4 different sections we have here. About, maybe 15-ish hours long for the main part, but then, you maybe about double that if you're going for completion. And I really liked that approach. I thought it was, refreshing to, after so long have, a completely different character, location, and just start from scratch with, leveling up and getting items and such. I will say the one kind of negative aspect to that was I feel like the overall story was, besides the spin-off Yakuza Dead Souls, probably the weakest of, the mainline games I've played to this point. And that's not to say it was bad by any means, but something just, for me, wasn't hitting quite like how it usually does. That's not to say either that you don't have, a strong supporting cast either. A lot of great characters. Really liked the new playable character, Shinada. I did look it up because I wasn't sure if it was just me, but I was kind of getting Ichiban-esque vibes, and I haven't played any of Ichiban's games yet, but based on, what I've seen, I felt like there was a bit of a comparison there, and that seems to be the general consensus. I'm probably mispronouncing her name, but I feel like Myri Park was also probably one of my favorite characters now in general for the whole series. I really like how you never knew quite what you were getting into when she showed up. Like, some of her actions would, make you really mad, but then, she might have, sort of a sweet motherly moment with Haruka that would make you wind up liking her. So it was, fun. She was a fun, flawed character, and I just kind of wish she got a little more screen time, I guess, in the game. Overall, I do feel like I preferred Yakuza Zero's multiple styles and style switching over, having one style but 4 different protagonists. And I guess at the core of it, too, Yakuza 0 had 6 sort of main fighting styles and a couple unlockable, but that wasn't until later. Where here, with all the protagonists, you only have 4, so. But, overall, the different protagonists, I feel like it's, a decent enough trade-off. Something in general I didn't like gameplay-wise, or I should say, like, I have really mixed feelings on it. Because in general, I don't like when games, you get this, cool new weapon, and then it's like, oh, you're not a high enough proficiency to actually, use it yet. And this game does that, which I don't like. But at the same time, I do like the overall idea of having, a proficiency level here, and just in general, to give you an incentive to, use all the different items available. I just wish that they went a different way with it. Maybe you lock, in Yakuza's case, heat actions behind needing that certain proficiency for the weapon, or you can do other stuff in general, like maybe you do less damage if you're not at the appropriate proficiency, or maybe you have like a potential failure rate with the item. Maybe you trip up or you miss an attack or something if you're not a high enough proficiency. And I should note that this is something that could have maybe existed in other entries and I just never noticed, because I think I've mentioned in other, series videos that there's so much to these games that there's some features I just kind of skipped out on and was just like, I'll get into it the next time. And cameo works and equipable weapons outside, just picking up stuff on the battlefield were, two of those two things I just never really bothered too much with until, honestly, Dead Souls, but this is the first mainline time I dived into it. The only thing I wish I kind of knew going in was I thought you would be able to buy pretty much any weapon from Kamiya Works, or Kamiyama. Sorry, like I said, pronunciation's not my strong suit, but turns out that there's, a lot of weapons that seem to be exclusive to the just general open world combat, and that maybe some exclusive to story missions in that too. So I wish I knew that going in, so I didn't, miss out on, potential cool weapons to, upgrade and mess with. But it is what it is. I know for next time now. It's a good thing I got into, the weapon equipping in that too, because our new character, Shinada here, is sort of built around that, his sort of main gimmick. Having some, extra heat actions and some weapons that, don't get worn out. Although they're admittedly weaker, I don't know if there was a way to maybe get an upgraded version that was still, unable to get worn down. Haruka, too, had a completely different gameplay loop, which I really liked. I like rhythm games in that. I feel like it came at the perfect time, right in the middle of, getting introduced to our protagonist here. My only complaint about her section is outside of the dance battles, her more story line missions. She has 3 main songs, and the one so much more. I mean, it's a decent song, and the gameplay of it's fun, but I don't know, maybe it was intentional that we played that one so much to sort of, I'm sure real musicians repeat the same shit all the time. But from a gameplay perspective, and I know you might have to mess around with, how the story progressed in that too with it, but I feel like from a gameplay perspective, it would have been better and more fun to have, the 3 different storyline songs more evenly split. Something I kind of forgot about, but wound up really missing and appreciating here, was the, bigger mini games. Each story section pretty much has one. I'll admit they kind of start out stronger than they finish with them, but they're all, a fun break, good enough gameplay and, just sort of engagement to sort of get into too. I will say that the middle 2, for Seijima and Haruka, I felt like they were, maybe a little too grindy. Like, I feel like they just overstayed their welcome for me, to where I was kind of done with them, but I only had a couple left, so I went through them. So it wasn't, that bad. At least once again, I went for completion with everything too, so maybe it's not as bad if you're just doing the main stuff. Something, though, that I remembered was missing, that was back and, sorely missed before this point. Sorry, I bumped my mic there. Was the sort of wacky part of the tome, particular within the cities and exploration, in that, like, you had a little bit of it in particularly 3 and 4 with Revelations, but where it was really missing, I feel like, was the side stories. I feel like they were, a little more bare bones and to the point. And it's just a lot better here, and I wouldn't even say it's at its peak here, but still, there it was, pretty close And, just having that, not knowing what you're getting into with the side stories and just the world in general, it's pretty great. It's something that, really made the series special for me, getting into it. And, good to see it back at, pretty much full force. Something else I appreciated too is, so one thing I skipped out on until 4 was the hostess minigame. And the hostess minigame in 4 was kind of brutal to go for completion with. So, and I think it was like the same in Dead Souls. I wound up not even really going for it in Dead Souls. But here, I wasn't planning on going through with it. Maybe I would do, one of the hostesses. But here, they did a really good job of splitting it up more, not going overboard. I think in the last game, each character had 3. Here, each character has 1. One character kind of has 2. But still, only 5 total compared to a dozen last time. And just doing it in general is more streamlined, and once again, I wasn't planning on going all the way through with it, but it was good enough with the streamlining and improvements that I did wind up doing all of it, and had a fun time. I kept mentioning 4 parts to this game. There is a 5th, though. There is a 5th part where, all of the major players left wind up in Kamurocho for, the big finale and sort of connecting everything together. And I feel like the main story part was pretty good, but I feel like the side content there was kind of lacking. There wasn't, as much to do outside of the main story, so some lost potential there, I think. Just a little weird, because that's the only... there's like a little section in Kamurocho early, but that's sort of, your main time there. So there's, I guess, not a lot to do in between getting your locker keys if you're, going for completing collectibles. There was also some performance issues I was having, particularly in Kamurocho, where it would sort of stutter when I would, leave a building or first load in, and it would be first loading the area. I did look it up, and it does seem to, just be a general issue with the engine and the port itself. I kind of figured it was, because I have a computer that should, be more than capable of running it flawlessly. But yeah, overall, this game, for me, was nearly perfect. Like I said, maybe some performance fixes, a little more side content in the 5th area, a couple, gameplay tweaks, and it would be there for me. I'll admit the approach, I can see why people wouldn't like this one as much. I feel like the approach with splitting the story up and, a few other things, like how deep they sort of dived into some of the side content, especially, with some of it being required for the main story. But overall, like I said, I like that sort of thing. I don't really care about it, but I can see the argument against it. On a side note, something completely unrelated, because I was even wondering, because would it just even be better for them to just, if they ever re-release this, to skip a Kiwami and just kind of do more what they did with 0 and, add English voice acting, address the things I mentioned earlier, because I feel like there's so little to do here to make it better, in my opinion. But it had me just thinking about Kiwami in general, and we got 3 from the point I'm putting this video out. I think it just came out. But I was even wondering, with Kiwami 3, I don't know if I'm the only one who feels this way, but I almost feel like Kiwami 4 was almost unnecessary. Was more necessary, looking back at it. Because I feel like 3 in general was kind of old and simplistic. It's just sort of the perfect mix of those two things, to where it didn't, it had charm to it, but it wasn't, overly out of date. I never played the original first and second game, so they may have been, they may have felt a little over outdated, but I don't feel like 3 really felt like that. But then you got 4, which, like I said, I always felt like that game was in such a weird spot, Because at the end of the day, I feel like it felt more like a worse version of what we got in games like 5 and 0. And there's just a lot more to improve on in the core of the game. I mean, it's probably the one game I could say to definitely not start with. I know that's a contested issue, is what game to start on if you're looking to get into the series, but definitely not 4, because it relies so heavily on stuff from the first 3 games. And it was great to see it all come together, but I feel like you could have maybe presented it better for newcomers. Like there's some room to improve there. And just the core of the game itself being, exclusive in Kamurocho, missing some of, the wackiness we would get into later. And I don't know. It's still a good game, but looking back, like it's probably my least favorite, honestly, out of what we got, or what I've played through so far.